Okay, so we've been working our way through some of the networking details, and I'd like to just talk about a few more networking tips. So one of them, of course, is going to be I mentioned that it is possible to have multiple IP addresses at the same time. And so I kind of want to show here, yes, sometimes you can go into your configuration file and add an IP address. You also can add an IP address just directly here through the command line. All right. And so in other words, the IP command does have some options to be able to modify and temporarily add an IP address. So let's see what this looks like. So let's double check my configuration. My configuration right now is I've got the ENS18 interface, and I've currently configured my netplan file to be the 192.168.118.2, all right, and this one is a /24. Now, what I want to emphasize here is that you do have the option to also add an IP address right here using the command line. So let's give it a try. So if I use my IP command, the options that I can start adding on is to say, well, I'm going to modify my IP ADDR. So I'll do an IP space ADDR. And then from here, I can have the add option. So I'm going to do IP ADDR add. And now it's going to be, well, what's the IP address that you want to add? So maybe I'll add 118.3 to this as well. We'll just kind of add the 192.168.118.2. We'll have 192.168.118.3. I'll take another IP address all here on the same network, also on the /24. So I'll say IP ADDR add, and then 192.168.118.3. And this one is also going to be a /24. And now we have to say, where do you want this to be assigned to? Which device? So you can say dev for device, and then this one will be the ENS18 adapter. Now, just like before, if you try doing commands that modify services, this is obviously something that's going to require sudo privileges. So I want to show just a little trick here that if you ever type out a whole bunch of stuff on the command line and you forgot sudo and you need to get back to the front to add in sudo, you can press Ctrl+A on your keyboard. Ctrl+A is a shortcut to be able to, it's kind of like hitting the home key. It jumps you back to the start. And so Ctrl+A and Ctrl+E will jump you to the start of your command and the end of your command. So nevertheless, it's like, oops, I forgot sudo. This command is going to require sudo. You press Ctrl+A, you're now back to the start, and I can now add in the sudo to the front of my command. So I've got a sudo IP ADDR add 192.168.118.3/24, and we're adding this to device ENS18. Let's give that a try. Okay, did it work, right? If I do an IPA, it's like, well, actually, I've got more than one IP address right now. Right, I've got both the 192.168.2 and I've got the 192.168.118.2 and the 192.168.118.3. Okay, the difference, of course, is that this is what we would call a temporary IP address. Right, and so temporary IP addresses like this, they're not actually added to our configuration files. Right, if I take a quick look at my configuration file. If I cat out /etc/net, this one was the net plan, and then we had that 01-network manager file, right? If I cat this out, this file has not changed. All right, I just temporarily added an IP address here to this particular interface. So it's an important thing to understand that temporary IP address additions like this, they don't survive a restart. All right, and so that's really critical to understand that if you were to go and restart your whole computer, any temporary IP addresses that you had added, they're not going to be saved. All right, and this is why we want to make sure we understand, like, yeah, this is an acceptable way to add an IP address, but this is not a good long-term strategy, especially if you think you have to restart your server at some point. So this is why we learn how to modify the configuration files, because the configuration files, those are going to survive a restart, whereas the temporary additions are not. Having said that, though, you also might want to learn, well, how could I just sort of trash all my IP addresses? How can I get rid of all my IP addresses in case some temporary ones have been added either maliciously or perhaps they've been added by accident or by mistake? They're wrong. Okay, so there's another IP ADDR command for that as well. All right, and so this is a common term we hear about in networking, which is called flushing. If you want to flush your network configuration, you can flush your IP address, which effectively tells the interface, like, hey, any IP addresses you have right now, get rid of them. Get rid of the IP addresses that have currently been assigned to your device. So again, this is going to require sudo. So we'll have a sudo IP ADDR, and then we could have something like flush dev ENS18. All right. So, and there's a variety of IP ADDR commands that you could have. IP ADDR add, IP ADDR flush. I'm just showing a few of the common ones that you might want to be aware of here. So let's give this one a try. All right. So I'll now flush the IP address here, and let's see what my IPA now says. It's like, well, both the permanent configuration as well as the temporary configuration, they've both been removed. What about my file? What about my netplan file? Has that been touched? Did the flush actually kill that? Let's cat that out again. And when you cat it out again, it's like, nope, all that information is still there. So this is why it's good to get some of your servers, get them to a working state, and then have a backup of your configuration files. So if things ever get broken, if they ever get lost, things get screwed with throughout the day, you know, some attacker comes in and destroys stuff, it's like, well, I'll be able to restore from a previous working configuration file. I'll flush out everything that's there, I'll bring in the new configuration file, and then all you have to do, of course, is just restart things, right? So I could do something like a sudo netplan apply, and once I do a sudo netplan apply, it's going to go back to my configuration file. It got rid of all the temporary addresses that were added, and now we were able to add in our permanent IP address from our configuration again. So good thing to be aware of on how to do, and very, very useful. I should also point out this is another reason why something like the ifconfig command is a little bit lacking. Because notice the ifconfig command here, like, yeah, ifconfig does also show you your IP address. It'll tell you right here, 172.20118.100. Like, yeah, that's true. What if we added in a temporary IP address? What if I do something on this machine like a sudo IP ADDR, and then we're going to do an add, and I'll add in, like, right now I'm 172.20. I'll keep it on the same network, but this time I'll be 118.101. And I'll keep it as a /16 network, yeah, sure, and we'll add this to dev ETH0. All right, so I'm adding another IP address to this particular device, but let's see what happens when we do this. If you run the ifconfig command again, what does it say your IP address is? Still says .100, right? It doesn't have the .101. When we do our IPA command, we'll see it's like, actually, the change did happen. You are both of them right now. However, the ifconfig command doesn't actually show you that. It only shows you the top one. So what if somebody else, when they're messing with things, added some other IP addresses so then it could screw up your networking? And if all that you knew was the ifconfig command, if this is all the information that you see, you know, you're not going to see that additional IP addresses have been added to your system. Or maybe you're going to be adding one in of your own and like, why isn't it changing? It's not changing up here. It's like, well, again, you're seeing a limitation kind of here of the command. All right. So again, this is kind of why we use the IPA command. So maybe I'll flush that out, right? I'll do an IP ADDR flush dev, and then in this case it's ETH0. It's not ENS18. It's like, oops, let's go ahead and remember sudo. I'll press Ctrl+a and add in a sudo to that. It's like, there we go. Now when I do my IPA, it's like I've got no IP addresses. Well, let's just go ahead and restart my networking service to bring it back. I'll do a sudo systemctl restart networking, right? Lots of different ways that I could bring it back, but that's one way that will certainly work, is just learn how to restart the service. So some good more practice here, working with some common commands to get rid of IP addresses, kind of clear things out, understand that you can have a temporary IP address in addition to having an IP address that's been permanently added to a configuration file. And, you know, there are some reasons why you would do one instead of the other. So, okay, cool.